Hey everybody, I wanted to talk to you today about the visual elements. Um, and the visual elements are the components or the elements, things that artists use to create a work of art. So, for example, on this slide you can see that the visual elements are line, shape, space, texture, um, color, light, and value. I talked about those together, and time and motion. Now, if you think about it, oftentimes if you're going to create a work of art, the first thing you do is grab a pen and draw some lines to create some shapes, which subdivides the space and so forth. And so they all are very, very interactive. It's difficult to talk about them separately because they are so tightly connected, but we're going to try. For example, let me show you this. If I said, okay, here's a piece of paper, right, the black outline of the rectangle is your piece of paper. And then I say, okay, I want you to take a pen and draw a green line across the paper, and you do that. You can see that you have created now two different shapes. You have subdivided the space. You've created a line. And so just doing something like laying down one line involves three of the visual elements. So these are the things that artists use to create works of art. I would like in this particular lecture to talk about two of those, and that is line and shape. Now, let's talk first off, let's talk about, let's start with line, because line is what we might think of as the nervous system of a work of art. Let's talk about types of line that you have available to use as an artist. The first one is actual lines. And if you look at this artwork that's up here, it's kind of an installation piece where the artist has gone in and drawn white lines on the walls. Those are actual lines, right? They have length, they have somewhat of width, but of course the width has to be much shorter than the length to create a line. And he has subdivided this space using it. Sometimes that's all that artists have at their disposal to use because of different materials that media that we use. All we get is actual line. So for example, if you draw with pen and ink, and you can see in this particular work, that is what the artist has used to make this drawing. He only can use lines because he did a pen, and pen and ink doesn't let you get different shades of value, like different grays. You can only create value by putting the lines closer together or further apart. So sometimes this is all an artist uses at all is actual line in a work of art. I use it in kind of, this is a little different format, but the artwork that's hanging on the wall here is one of mine. It was in a gallery in New York that you can kind of see out the window. It's a really pretty little town there. And this is a work on paper, and I actually cut away all the paper and just left the lines, so it's still actual lines. Here's a close-up to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So you can see my hand back behind it. And I left all the actual lines in place. So the closer the lines were together, the darker it appears, and the further apart, the lighter it appears. Another type of line that we have at our disposal is called implied lines. Sometimes implied lines are psychological lines that we follow because we're interested in where people are looking. So this is a work of art by Leonardo da Vinci called the Madonna of the Rocks, and he creates implied lines because of the way people are pointing or the way they're looking. So for example, you can see he gets everyone to look over at the Christ child by using psychic lines or implied lines to make that happen. We're super interested in what other people are looking at, right? We're super curious people. So if you know everybody's looking in one direction, we're going to look there too. Another type of implied line would be to just strategically place shapes in such a way that our eyes go with them. So in fact, there's not really a line here. There's just a whole bunch of shapes, but by the way the artist placed them together, we follow it. This is another example of that. You can see that there is a line that has been created right here, a super strong one, right? Just by the placement of all these other lines. Because of the way that all the other lines placed and stacked, we see that particular bend and arc like that. Sometimes artists cleverly use those. Words are really super good implied lines. We follow letters so that we can read and understand. Sometimes they happen in, in nature. Sometimes they often will happen in architecture. And you can see in this particular work, these are all placed in such a way that they create a line that we follow. And maybe they even create several lines that we follow in this work. An artwork can have more than one type of line. You can use implied lines, like you see here. This would be an implied line. You see how those dots are going around, creating that movement, and we follow it. Or it could be an actual line right here. There's a great example of an actual line. So sometimes you can have both of them. There are functions of line and things that lines do for us. One of those would be outline and contour. The difference between an outline is the very edge of a shape, whereas contour lines are descriptive lines that would happen within that shape. So, for example, in this particular work, if I just did an outline of her, right, that would be the outline. But all these lines inside, showing us there's a bracelet, showing us where her skirt is, showing us where her side is, where her arm is, those would be contour lines. They show us the form and they describe something as three-dimensional. Let me give you an example. This is an outline. Sometimes if you have an outline, you may or may not be able to tell what that is. So if you look at this, you would say, I don't know. Some people, when I put it up, say, I think it's a bed. A lot of people just plain don't know. Problem is, you need more lines. You need contour lines. You need those descriptive lines that happen inside that shape. So it is actually this. Right? You probably would have never come up with that on your own, but as you look at this now, you go, oh, now I understand those inside lines. That's what I need. Contour lines. Another function of line is line direction. Horizontal lines are very calm, relaxing lines. There's one here, there's one here, there's one down here. The trees are basically a horizontal line, and it feels very, very calm, right? Very strong horizontal lines, very calm. Vertical lines are more assertive type of lines. And so she is a very strong vertical. She feels very, dominant. It feels like a very aggressive work, right? Not a just coincidence that we use strong vertical lines in buildings like the Supreme Court. Diagonal lines suggest movement, suggest action, create a very active, dynamic work. So you've got a really strong vertical line here, really strong vertical line going down there, and it creates a movement in a work of art. Okay, so we've got lots of action going on there. In this particular work, very strong diagonal line. They're bringing the body of Christ down off of the cross, and so there's a lot of handling and moving of the body down. So really strong diagonal line to show that. Sometimes things aren't supposed to be diagonal, and they are, and you get a sense that, they might just fall. You can have all of them in a work of art. As you can see in this, we have vertical lines, we have diagonal lines, we have horizontal lines. Chances are, if that happens, the dominant line will be vertical. Vertical usually dominates a work. Another function of art would be modeling and shading. We brought this up just a few minutes ago when we talked about pen and ink drawing. But as you can see in this, I want to create lights and darks and make something look more realistic. And sometimes the only thing I have is actual lines to make that happen. So the closer lines are, the darker it looks. The further apart lines are, the lighter it looks. So I can still create lights and darks and get a sense of shading, but I have to use a technique called hatching or cross-hatching. Sometimes something like this is a woodcut, and that's the only thing you can do in woodcut. What you take away doesn't print, right? And I think if you look at this closely, this is a Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse by Albrecht Dürer, and he's a great wood carver, as you can imagine. But as you look at this, I want you to keep in mind, he cut away the white, and he left the black. He cut around these lines. That's crazy good. We could also do what we call stippling or pointillism in a work of art. And if you can believe this, this is a pen and ink drawing by an artist, and it's all dots. Let me show you a close-up so you can see it. This is her hair. Right? Closer the dots are together, the darker it is. Further apart they are, the lighter it is. Oftentimes lines also will create movement in a work of art. So if I ask you what's the focal point of this work, this is the Lamentation by Giotto, done in the early 1300s. You would look at this and say, oh, well, I think it's right here. That's where my eyes tend to go. Well, there's a couple reasons for that. One is you've got a really strong line that just takes us there, right? But that psychic line, where all those people are looking, we want to look there too, and everybody's looking there, right? We can't help it. We have to go there. He's telling us, you got to go there. I'm making all the lines go there. There's also pattern and texture in a work of art. So as you can see, patterns are a motif or a line or something that repeats at regular intervals, that you expect it to happen in a sequential way. So for example, the lines here are pretty evenly dispersed, creating a pattern that runs across the back, and it kind of connects them all together. This is a pattern, right? We've got blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red. That happens here. But texture might not happen in a preordained way. So you wouldn't necessarily expect it to happen, but we can use lines to create textures, and I think the best way you can see that is oftentimes like animals or fur. And so as it comes through, even if you look at the hay or the grass that's around here, you can see that these aren't happening in any order, right? It just gives a texture. It's not blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, or a fat line, thin line, fat line. It happens randomly. Same thing in the fur itself. The lines happen randomly, but create a sense of texture. Now, let's talk about shape for a minute. Second of visual elements. In shape, two-dimensional area with identifiable boundaries. Keep in mind, they have to be identifiable. If you can't tell where it stops and starts, it's not a shape, right? So, this is super easy. Two types of shape I want you to remember. The first type is geometric, right? Circles, triangles, squares, rectangles. Think mathematics when you think of a geometric shape. Okay, geometric. Organic shapes are based in nature, so they're a free-formed, flowing type of shapes. Think of things that are alive. And if we tried to create this shape, of this figure, you couldn't say, well, it's squares and circles and rectangles, right? And I always say, think of a microscope, amoeba in a microscope. It has that kind of free form area. We look at this one, we'll go, okay, I would take this whole shape and I'd even put these two together like this, right? And that would be an organic shape, a very natural looking shape. You can have both. In a work of art, it can happen, right? I can have this cube, which would be geometric, but then I come over here and go, well, I don't know, this is pretty organic. So sometimes in a work of art that they can both happen. Usually it's something like this. That's a modern work. Most traditional works would be one or the other. Positive and negative areas, or what we call figure ground areas, are also important when we're talking about shapes. There are certain forms that come forward towards us, shapes that come forward and seem to dominate a work of art, where others seem to fall back into what we might think of as the background or the negative area. And let's look at a couple examples of that. So this is a painting I love by John Singer Sargent. He's one of my favorites. You're also going to look at him. You already have looked at him actually in the last chapter. And if you say, well, what are the two, what's the dominant shapes in this? You probably think the kids. And so if we just block it out and then look at it, that would be the figure-ground relationship. In this particular work, you'd say, okay, well, she's definitely important. And I maybe even think that the wash basin that she's in seems important. And you know what? This whole table area seems to come forward. Other than that, I think the rest of it would be background. So what does it look like when we reduce it down to positive, negative? It would look like that. And the more interesting these shapes, the more interesting your composition is. So if we look at this particular work, I'd say, well, I like her for sure, and I think I like him. The tables seem to be like a big deal. But other than that, like I don't even think her legs are that, and don't seem to stand out to me. So if we reduced it down and looked at it, right, if I make everything red, the negative, and green, the positive, it would look like this. Okay? Sometimes works of art are so strong with a positive-negative relationship that I can almost show you that, and you could tell me the painting. And in this case, right, the painting is The Scream by Munch. So that can happen too. When you can't tell the difference between positive and negative, we call that an ambiguous positive-negative relationship. So this one is very interesting. Escher, the German artist, that was his bread and butter. What is there? What isn't there? What's negative? What's positive? What's standing out? I can't tell. And it's always like, if you're looking at the white, you can't see the black, and if you're looking at the black, you can't see the white. It has a very interesting, ambiguous relationship between the two. Okay, we're going to stop there for now, and I'll talk to you again soon about the next video.